Hey guys, so you would have seen in the news recently that investors and Byju's shareholders are demanding that Byju's founder Ravindran Byju should be terminated from his position, right? Should be fired from his position because of all the things which are happening in Byju's. So the question is, as a founder, how can you protect yourself from being fired by an investor, from getting fired by your shareholders, which essentially will be your investors, right? Now, in a startup, in early stages, it is difficult for an investor to fire a founder because in early stages, the founders hold majority stake in a startup, right? So, for example, when you raise your first round, you might give 20% to this investor and you still hold 80%. So, the majority votes, the majority rights to take decisions in your startup are with you. So, it's difficult for that investor to fire you as a founder. But now, let's say if in year one you give 20% to an investor and you have 80%, right? In year two you raise another funding round and you give another 20% to an investor, so now investors hold 40%, you hold around 60% hypothetically, right? And in year three you dilute another 20% from your equity, so now you hold 40% and investors hold 60%. Now what could happen is, if something goes wrong because of any reason, it could be a reason not under your control, but if investors want, and if those three investors that hold 20% if they want, they could fire you, technically fire you from your startup, because they have majority shareholding now, which is more than 50%. So how can you prevent that from happening? A very simple way to do that is, when you sign an investment agreement or a term sheet, there is a clause for founders known as founders right or promoters right. Founders and promoters are essentially considered it the same thing. So there's a clause called founders right or promoters right. Now, what is in that clause is that the actual text of that clause is that investors cannot terminate the employment of the founders for a period of X years, right? This is a sample clause that is there in promoters right. Now this X years can be anything, right? This could be 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year also. Now the higher the number of years, the more difficult it would be to convince the investors to agree on that clause, because to be fair to the investors, at some point in time they should have the option to terminate the founders if they feel that the founder is not good for the startup, or he's not making the startup grow at this stage. So they should have the right, because they own the company, they also own the company, right? So ideally, the promoters right and the period for which the investors cannot fire the founders is usually 3 to 5 years. In my first startup, I had it for 3 years, but it's an essential clause for founders to know. A lot of founders I see do not even know about this clause, but it is and sometimes when you raise funding for an early stage startup, you have so much equity that you sort of neglect this clause, thinking that you have a larger proportion of shareholding, equity percentage in your company, so investors can't take the majority decision. But as you go down the line, you never know, your startup might grow very fast and you might you might need a lot of fund, and for that you might dilute and go below 50% of equity. So promoters right or founders right is a very essential clause. I'll repeat it again, that what it states is that the investors cannot fire or terminate the employment of the founders for X number of years. I hope you found this valuable. Thank you.